Welcome to this week's St. Clair County Board of Commissioners meeting. The types of business that occur at these meetings include public hearings, official voting on actions by the Board of Commissioners, presentations by departments of the county, and recognition of service that makes our county great. As your elected representatives, the St. Clair County Board of Commissioners is committed to improving the lives of all our residents while preparing county government to meet the demands of the future. In order to do that, we need to share our thoughts and plans with you. More importantly, we need you to share your thoughts, concerns, and opinions with us. We encourage you to come and experience the process by attending any of these meetings. They occur every first and third Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. at the St. Clair County Administration Building at 200 Grand River Avenue in Port Huron.
Is it a security issue?
I'd like to call this evening's meeting of the St. Clair County Board of Commissioners Human Service Committee to order. Roll call, please, Chris.
Commissioner McConnell, Commissioner Heidemann,
Here.
Commissioner Bohm,
Here.
Commissioner Dunn,
Here.
Commissioner Rushing,
Here.
Commissioner Graytop,
Here.
Commissioner Tamian.
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on our agenda is whether we would have additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda. I'm not aware of any.
I would move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
This is the time in our meeting when we ask any citizens of which wish to address the Board of Commissioners on Human Service Committee matters to make their presentations. Is there anybody here? I haven't received any written requests to speak to us tonight. Okay, thank you. Under updates, we have a presentation from the Health Department. Dr. Mercantile.
Hi, you guys. Good evening. This kind of comes on the heels of some lead concerns we've had in the community. I thought it would be a good time to update you on what we're doing and what's been done on the lead issue. The problem, of course, is lead is everywhere. It's ubiquitous in our community. It was used in lots and lots of products, the least of which was paint, and it still is, in fact, used in some industrial processes. So lead is in our environment. It is persistent in our environment, and it will continue to be a legacy issue for a long time to come. The most common source of lead currently is lead in our paints. They were banned. Lead was banned in 1978 from paint, but a lot of houses were built before then. So we see a lot of lead exposure, especially through renovations. Lead, of course, was in gasoline, and that was banned, I think, as well in the 80s, but certainly we still see a lot of roadways where there is still lead deposition from the gasoline fumes and emissions, even from all that time. It persists in children's toys, especially those made overseas. Many plates and ceramics that still come over from other countries have lead exposure. And we can see lead dust from soil, which I'm going to talk about in a little while as well. So who's most at risk? Children and pregnant women. And that's because their systems, particularly their neurological systems, are vulnerable. They're still developing. And in pregnant women in particular absorb, because of their metabolic process, considerably more lead than you and I. So if a child or a pregnant woman were exposed to lead and swallowed it, their absorption can be as much as 50 to 70% more than what maybe you or I might absorb. So it varies a lot how much lead can get into your system. Exposure to the same amount of lead can result in considerably different amounts of lead being absorbed and problems associated with it. So it's not a one-to-one situation. And these are generally the effects of lead poisoning. Not to go through them all, but the bottom line is it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem, and there's no safe amount of lead. As you guys are probably aware, the lead issues in Flint have created considerable more scrutiny and concern, And I think that's in many ways a good thing because there's a greater amount of public awareness because lead is bad. Being exposed to lead is bad. Generally, the younger you are, the worse it is. In adults, we can get exposed to considerably more and not have as many symptoms, but if you have chronic illnesses or other conditions, it can make adults ill as well. So, this is a map. I just want to kind of share this with you because this is not a Flint problem. It is not a Detroit problem. And as you can see, I don't have a pointer, but in St. Clair County, there's a bunch of dots. There's a large dot in the Port Huron area, and that's because urban areas just kind of have a clustering of these problems. Now, to go over our data before we started looking at the localized community near Mueller Brass. This is some data that we collected from 2016. As you can see in St. Clair County, we screen more than average, which I think is a reflection of the fact that we screen regularly in WIC. It is recommended that all children under the age of 6 get screened for lead. And as a result, I think we have a slightly higher rate of 5% than the state average. Now, when you look at individual zip codes, and I just pulled out the ones that were over that state average, you can see that it is not just the 48060 Port Huron zip code that's having trouble. In fact, we screen the most kids in Port Huron because that is our urban center and where a lot of our services are located. But you can see some of our urban areas have pretty high rates. That 48063, I believe that's Columbus area, the Columbus Township area. 48079, and look over on the far left, that's Emmett, that area way out rural. Now, we don't screen as much, but the kids we do screen are positive. So this is not just an urban problem. This is not a problem just related to poverty. In fact, a lot of our kids that are found to be positive are from homes that are just being renovated. People are buying homes and renovating them and aren't aware of the lead risk when they start sanding down the walls and pulling down the windows, et cetera. And this is hard to see, but, yes, sir.
Do you want to take questions?
Please, anytime, so.
I was looking at the map and looking at the statistics of the state, and the state's not really testing everybody.
No.
And so this is,
Most of our data comes for children under 6. And the data you're looking at is all lead levels for children under 6.
and looking at the map, you know, I thought that the graphic that you had, the previous one with the big green dots and everything,
That one.
having lived in a couple of those other communities, it's really interesting to see that the older core cities are the ones that have the highest incidence. And it's really correlated a lot with that, not
It is.
not with industrial pollution or other
Correct,
sources.
correct. And that's an important point I want to bring up, that it is still our number one issue is with old homes that are peeling and dilapidated, particularly a problem in our rentals where you can't catch up to these kids. By the time you identify that they have a lead risk, they've moved out and moved on. And that issue of homes being just kind of people moving in and out can make it hard to track down where these people are and what to do for them. The thing we do with lead exposure is we identify, if we can, the source, and we remove the source of lead. We encourage them to eat a healthy diet rich in calcium and vitamin C and iron, and we recheck their lead in 3 to 6 months. So there is no specific antidote. There is a chelation therapy for very, very high lead levels. Vast majority of kids, we just try and figure out where it's coming from, and the vast majority of time it's coming from their homes, okay, from inside their homes. Yes, sir.
I got 2 questions.
Sure.
One's going to be humorous, but I know we test more, which is great here in St. Clair County, and you got the Michigan average. Are we sure that we're testing, comparing apples to apples? Let's take, I don't know, any county, Wexford County, different counties within the state out of the 83, are they testing the same way we test?
Yes.
To get accurate results that, could you do your own testing in St. Clair County?
Well, in general, okay, so generally the testing, all the data you see is on children 6 years of age and under. It's primarily because that's a Medicaid reimbursable service, and so that's what your physicians and our departments can get reimbursed for. There's generally a screening way of testing, which is that finger capillary test, which is a screening test. It is not a reliable method to identify an actual poisoned or affected level. You have to get a blood draw, And one of the big problems we have in this community and elsewhere is that many people don't go and get their blood drawn to confirm that elevated test. So the data actually throughout the state, they do the same thing. They combine the confirmed and unconfirmed results of 6 and under. And those finger sticks they're fairly comparable, but they overestimate the burden.
Okay. The other one is in your next graph. Keep going, please.
Come on.
I guess the next one. There we are.
Okay.
And that's in reference because I live in Riley Township. You haven't tested nobody in Riley
There you go.
because we're perfectly healthy.
There you go. Well, I want to bring that up is the deficit. So our testing, you can see, is very sporadic. There are communities that we've barely touched on that we obviously have some concerns about. If you look at just ages of housing, some of those communities out by you have very old houses.
Mine was built in 1874.
Yeah, so is mine. So there are plenty of opportunities to raise awareness and improve our screening. It is just not about, in fact, one of the biggest misconceptions from Flint is it's all because of our water. And I would say we have yet to find any water issues in this community related to elevated lead. Certainly all the cases of elevated human beings with elevated lead levels have come from exposure from their housing environments. Adults tend to get exposed through occupational exposure, okay? And we don't have universal testing for adults. That we test adults based on risk. So if they're working in an environment, usually an occupation or a job that has lead, we'll test them, and that's part of their OSHA's standards to do this. So we don't have a way, for instance, and we'll get into this, our Mueller-Brass response, where we went and we screened everyone in that community who desired to be screened. We currently do not have a good comparative population to decide whether those levels are high or not. My sense is, and we'll go over this, my sense is they were not particularly high, but the state is looking currently to try and compare an adult population with one with the same demographics as what we did. So the data that we use is 6 and under, and what we've done here locally is different, and that's one of the points I wanted to make sure you understood.
I don't know if they have, and this came up with the Edison plant. This is kind of an interesting story. So they talk about areas of concern. I met with a reporter, and it was regarding Edison at one time, and he says, "Are you worried that Edison falls into an area of concern?" I said, 5 years ago, an area of concern wasn't an area of concern because they never had a standard that was set for that particular level. So when they come and they set a standard, they give you time to clean it up per se, or types of things. Do you run in those situations? And I use that as a...
Well, it's a great
lead
example. Air monitors, the Department of Environmental Quality had some issues with a similar industry. In fact, I think it was a sister organization of the Mueller-Brass, on the other side of the state, that had significant lead emission contamination concerns. And so as a result, they came over to our community and did some air emissions standards. They found, as this note shows, over several years a general increase, and we were unaware that this was even happening. They just kind of do this on their own based on risk assessment. The Mueller-Brass emissions never exceeded, the quarterly averages never exceeded the air quality standards, the national standards. However, there were individual days where they did. Depending on the air direction, the wind direction, there were variations. We could talk all about that, but it's probably not the details that you need. The bottom line is when they finally contacted us, they had enough concern that they were going to send Mueller-Brass some information. They were going to go in and inspect them, and they did, in fact, issue a violation, not on the air emissions, but on some equipment issues within the building. So this is a basic timeline, and I do this mostly maybe to protect our integrity, but I want to be very clear that we weren't aware that Mueller-Brass was doing air emission screening for the last 4 years. We were notified of April 11th of this year. We had many conversations with DEQ, and at that point thought that there was enough information to suggest that if there's elevated air emissions, there may be increased soil deposition from the lead, as it. So we did, in fact, encourage them to do the soil sampling. Like everything else, they had to go around and get lots of permission slips. They did get into approximately 40 homes, And at the point we understood that the soil sampling did show some elevated levels is when we got involved, and within 2 weeks, we were doing the human being screenings. You talk about the difference in standards, and in lead standards, they're changing constantly. So in soil, the housing regulations are 400 parts per million in a soil sample, and if it's under a drip line, where the house, the water would drip down, it's 1,200 parts per million was the cutoff. That is changing to 190 as a result of ongoing concerns of lead. So huge differences in standards. That standard is still unofficial, but when we were discussing this with DEQ, we did use that lower standard to identify houses and houses that might be at risk. So that's one of the things I want you to understand. The standard we used was considerably lower than what you'll find currently in the ordinances and rules and regulations, okay? And because that we felt was a more conservative standard for human health and well-being. So we sent those letters, as you all know. Hopefully I informed you of interest. We released the update on the soil sampling. And we had one open house where it was very poorly attended, and then it was after further, I think, media attention, the second Harrison house. Screening was much better attended, and I want to go over that data with you. So really from start to finish, we're talking less than 2 months that we really got a lot of this information in. This is the soil testing data. I apologize, it's so hard to read. So the initial testing was close to 40 yards. This was all done by the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. Each yard had multiple samples done. They went and they plotted out some in the middle of the yard, some to the drip line. And from those yards, approximately 19 of the homes had at least one elevated sample, and I mentioned here the 190 parts per million. The other 20 did not have any elevated samples. And I want to be clear is that the elevated samples were various across the board. Some were elevated under the drip lines, which would suggest this has more to do with the paint of the home. Others were elevated in the middle of the yard. So there was a lot of variations on what kind of contaminations we were finding. Of interest is many of the homes that had positive samples, we had about 9 of them show up for testing, and none of them had elevated lead levels, which is reassuring. So despite the fact that yards and soil had higher levels, and some of them had quite high levels, the humans in those homes, at least, didn't appear to be unduly affected. Now, there's still 10 of them out there that we haven't done, and there's more. Now, of the 20 yards that had no elevation, 17 of those people showed up. A couple of them had elevated levels, but when they got their venous confirmations, they were negative again. So this is kind of an ongoing, as we get more venous samples to confirm, we're changing our numbers, and that may be a point of concern. But at least 13 more yards have been tested. The Mueller Brass ballpark has been tested, as well as the playground field next to Harrison. And the good news is those soil samples have all come down under that 190. So that's the good part. I believe they are continuing to do more sampling as well, and there is quite a bit more work that both DEQ and the health department at the state are doing to help us with the numbers. The boundary map. We did this solely based, and these are the people that got the letters. This was solely based on where DEQ did their sampling. And their sampling was based solely on who they could get permission from when they went door to door and asked for a sense or to get into the yard. So we took those boundaries and we took them out a couple blocks further, and we kind of just drew this map. This in no way reflects air currents, modeling for air emissions and where the lead might go. This was just a way of trying to hone in on where we knew there was some possible contamination and making sure that those human beings, the people that lived in this community, were in fact okay. So that's often been, and this isn't a hot zone. I don't want anyone to think that somehow this is an area of undue concern. I have to say the entire zip code, if you look at the modeling for those air currents, theoretically could have gotten air deposition from this industry. And I don't believe that this is the only area that should have heightened awareness of lead screening and what they should be doing. So this was the clinic at Harrison Center. Over 700 people came. We initially thought we'd be there in the morning and in the afternoon. There were so many people, we just stayed open. It was a very well-received clinic. We offered free lead testing as well as free information about lead prevention and how to go about with gardens and pets and all the questions that people had. And the results basically are we screened over 700 people. About up to 19 were elevated. That was about 2.7%. And I say up to because as we get those venous samples back in, if they're negative, we take them off the list. Initially, I believe this was like 24 samples that were elevated. The under the age of 6 comes up to about 9%. And if you remember my earlier slide, that is higher than what we have found in this community. But again, it's a much smaller sample. Only 55 children under the age of 6 showed up, and it was a focused screening. On the good side of that, we found some kids that had exposure to lead, whether it's through their soil or from their home or wherever, which might not have been found. So we feel that is a really positive outcome. And then of the adults, 14 of the rest of the 646 were elevated, about 2%. And that number is the one that we're asking the state to assist us with and see if we can come up with a comparable adult cohort population that's similar in the homes and demographics that we can compare it to. So that's pretty much it. We want people to continue to be aware of this. Come in and get screened. We're still screening, and we will still screen lead at no cost at the health department until we have a better handle on what's going on. Questions?
Great time.
Doctor, is there a half-life to this element of lead, or once it's in your system, can it be completely?
It can be slowly excreted. The problem is that it absorbs into our bones and our soft tissues and stays there for a very, very long time. It gets what we call sequestered into that. And so actually, it'll leave your bloodstream and get settled into your bones and some of these other tissues where it can't be, you can't find it. Now, in the case if you have a lot of lead burden like that, and you get really sick, your lead levels can actually go back up because they'll come back out of the bone into your bloodstream. But for an acute exposure, say you renovated your house and you got exposed to a bunch of lead, your lead levels go up. They generally, if you remove the exposure, they'll generally come down in 30 to 60 days. And that's what we really strive for. And I should bring this up because this is important for maybe people who are looking at this, is that lead poisoning can be prevented. Even if you're not sure what your lead exposure might be, washing hands, eating foods high in iron, calcium, and C really is important because it has to go through your mouth into your gut and get absorbed into your bloodstream. And these foods can really make that a lot more difficult. And we just talk about the dust and preventing it from coming into your home. So these simple things sound kind of simplistic, but they are very important. Howard?
Just a comment. This would be, these prevention methods would be particularly important for anyone living in a home back when they used lead-based paints. If you have a newer home, you know, probably
the home probably wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah,
but there are some hobbies that like
might, but
other
by
things.
and large, if you live in an older home, these would be really important lead poisoning prevention
Absolutely.
steps to take.
Especially if you're renovating your home. We see this so much. So it's not just poor people who live in old dilapidated houses. Any home built before 1980. You should
1980.
really consider the fact that underneath your new coats of paint, there are probably lead-based paints. Yes. Any other questions?
So possibly I'm not overweight, I just have heavy bones?
That's right. You just got
Get
heavy
you
bones.
tested.
Thank you for your attention. Please let me know if you have any other concerns.
Thank you, Dr. That was a very interesting presentation. Next on our agenda are conceptual initiatives. We have no old business. We have the new business item of the library board appointment. I believe this is Mike McCartney.
Make a motion, we send it on to the full board.
Support.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Are there any other human service matters to be brought before this committee this evening? Yes, Mr. Rush.
I have one, I'll try to keep like 3 minutes. If you're aware, I grew up on military bases. We had a class reunion from the school I went to in Swybrook and in Denver this week, or last week for the full week. And Chris Smith, our VA administrator, provided me with some veteran lapel pins and documentation. He gave me 10 to give out, which I did. It was a huge success. I really appreciated Chris, and I've mentioned Chris many times. We're going to have many more, and he's going to be forwarding documentation to surviving Vietnam veterans, and they're going to be getting documentation from St. Clair County, so the families have something on their wall. And that was just, it was like the hit of the whole night there. So people, I mean, I didn't have near enough to hand out. Everybody, yeah, my dad's alive. The oldest one was 92, and that's when I gave the first pin to, and then we divided them up, and then they're going to give me a list of who else needs them.
Very cool.
Yeah, my general impression is our veterans programs have really improved quite a bit since Chris has been on board.
And I guess one other thing, he has a commemorative coin. They're like a challenge coin, and part of the golf outing, and then I had many others that I purchased and donated. Oh, I did have one other thing. In addition, I want to give Phil Pablo credit. He got us another flag for this year for donation, and we raised over $1,000 for honor flights for the World War II vets to get to Washington, D.C. So the flag and the coins and some other things that were donated raised in excess of $1,000 to help get our veterans to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Good. Are there any other human service matters to come before us? We have for information only the Health Department points of interest for July.
I move that we receive and file the information only.
Support.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion to receive and file the packets.
So moved.
Support.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn. Support.
Mr. Graytop, you're getting up, so you've inherited public safety this evening, have you? You're welcome.
I'd like to call to order the St. Clair County Board of Commissioners Judiciary Public Safety Committee. The clerk would take the roll, please.
Commissioner McConnell, Commissioner Tamian,
Here.
Commissioner Heidemann,
Here.
Commissioner Bohm,
Here.
Commissioner Dunn,
Here.
Commissioner Rushing,
Here.
Commissioner Graytop.
Here. Additions or deletions to the agenda?
See, we have one addition. I'd move that we add the addition to new business.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'll make a motion to accept the agenda with the addition.
Support. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Citizens, anybody wishing to address the Judiciary Public Safety Committee meeting tonight? Very good. Any updates from commissioners? Let's do conceptual initiatives, old business, no, and new business. Item A, contract approval request, Lake Huron Medical Center.
I'd make the motion.
I'll support it. Motion and support to send this on to the full board. Let's have some discussion if we need it. Everybody know what's going on?
It's extension of a current contract that we have. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Our current contract has expired, so this is a new agreement, and it is just for a period of 1 year.
Okay. Captain Bliss, you're in the audience. Is there anything that you want to add to this particular item?
No, I think Gary covered it. Like I said, we've been working on an extension for a couple of years.
All right. While we vote on this, if you'd take the podium, I've got something else for you. So all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. If you're not aware, our jail just went through a rather rigorous testing, and I asked Captain Bliss if he would address us just briefly, Tom.
Sure, first of all, to clarify, it's one of 3. That was the second one. We got one coming this coming week also. As you all know, we got the ICE contract to board the detainees at the jail. And what comes with that is typical government stuff. We've got 263 pages of duplex components and priorities and so forth that we need to be able to comply with in order to house these individuals there. There's three components. There's an IHA, which does a medical. We did that back in June and got through that one. This past 2 weeks ago, we had the Office of Detention Oversight come through, which is, in a sense, an oversight arm of ICE itself. In other words, to give you a kind of a better explanation, it would be an Internal Affairs Bureau of a law enforcement department. They come in and double check, make sure things are done right. They bring a team of 8 people into the facility. And out of the 34 priority items that are within that 263 pages, they pick 15 and go through them with a fine-tooth comb. They literally tell you, we are going through this standard, line by line, word by word, looking for compliance. So it's by far more rigorous of the 3. And to give you a kind of a comparison of that, the one we're going to go through next week, 4 people are going to show up and they're going to go through everything in the same amount of period, 3 days. So we were able to get through that. Obviously, there was a few components being the minor part of the standard that we needed to correct on the spot. I mean, when you have that many things, not everything's going to be absolutely crystal clear and perfect. But they were minor in sense, and we did get them to comply. So.
Good. Sounds like you guys did a stellar job again this year.
Appreciate that.
Any questions for the captain? Again, congratulations, Tom. Nice job. Thank you. Any other judiciary public safety matters? No information only, receive and file, somebody?
So moved. Support?
Motion support, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. An adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. I'd like to call the St. Clair County Board of Commissioners Environmental and Public Works Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll?
Commissioner McConnell, Commissioner Tamian.
Here.
Commissioner Bohm.
Here.
Commissioner Dunn.
Here.
Commissioner Rushing.
Still here.
Commissioner Greatop.
Here.
Commissioner Heidemann.
Any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda? Seeing none proposed.
Make
I
a
would
motion, we
entertain a-
accept the agenda as presented. Support.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Any citizens to be heard regarding environmental or public works matters? Seeing none, we'll go on to updates from commissioners. No updates from commissioners. Any conceptual initiatives from administration? No old business. We'll go on to new business. Matt's here. We have change order number 1 for sell at the landfill 4C and sell 8 changes.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Excuse me, Matt, is this for final action?
No.
Okay.
Both of these change orders, you've got a cover memo for both of them, explaining in a little bit more detail what they're all about. In each instance, what we had to do is get down to stable ground and remove unsuitable soils, unstable soils, deleterious materials in both instances. And that's the overall big picture. In order to build something, you've got to have a firm foundation. That was the goal here. With the first one, change order number 1, it was an area of undercutting under the cell 4C berm construction. And I gave a couple of sheets at your stations there just to help illustrate this. The first one has 2 yellow highlighted areas. The L-shaped portion is the 4C berm construction, and the larger, more rectangular squarish is the cell 8 construction area. The very bend or the corner of the cell 4C is where the undercut area was that we had to take care of, which is change order number 1. Essentially, that was an old perimeter road area that we had to remove. And when we were in the process of removing it, it was apparent there was a lot of sand fill that had gone in there years and years ago. And what we needed to do was have solid clay under there that was going to knit into the clay that we were going to be building on top. So from a structural strength standpoint and a regulatory standpoint, we have to have that clay to clay. That total amount we had to take out was about 3,000 cubic yards.
What'd you do with that?
That material went into a stockpile up on the top, and it's being used by the site personnel for daily cover and interim cover materials. If you, the total amount that we came up with for that item was $51,962.40, which was based on the bid unit price for that line item in the contract. As I mentioned in the memo, in the contract, we put a 200-yard number for that line item, knowing that it was very likely we'd have undercuts, but absolutely no way of knowing how much. So we essentially put a placeholder in there knowing we were probably going to have to do that.
I'd make the motion.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any other discussion or question? Go ahead,
So-
Commissioner.
Both of these change orders have been through the change order committee?
No, they were too large to take to the change order committee. So they're coming direct to you tonight.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Move that one on to the board. Okay, you want to go to change order number 2, which is cell 4C and cell 8 change order number 2.
This second change order has to do with the bottom of the cell 8 disposal area. The second graphic that I've provided you shows the cell 8 footprint prior to building the side slopes, and I've got a green highlighted area. That denotes at the time of our annual topo last November, the limits of water that was being held at that low point at the back of the landfill. That's simply to illustrate to you that this area has been used as a receptacle for surface water runoff for many, 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 many years. And over time, you've got silt, you've got sediments that built up in there, and that's obviously where we're building cell 8. So we had to get all of that slop and gook out of there and removed so that we could build the liner system in there. The amount that had to come out was significantly more than what we had pegged in the line item. We had a 5,000 yard estimate. We ended up taking about 22,000 yards out. There's 3 basic reasons for that. Number one, we ran into some additional material down there, some old road base, asphalt and concrete that we had to get removed, and it wasn't worth trying to separate it out because it was mixed with all the other gook. Number two, we did find, as that was being pushed out, some areas of silt and sand seams through that area. That kind of exacerbated the issue with the water. It kind of brought it down a little bit deeper and saturated more soils than we originally thought we probably were going to have to deal with. And thirdly, it was really hard to estimate how much there was going to be in the first place, simply because this is a mucky mess. It always held some amount of water, and it was very hard to try to define how much we had. So roll all those things in together with the fact that we had to get down to a reasonably stable surface to continue to build from. We have that much material we had to take out, unfortunately.
Any questions for Matt?
I'll make a motion, we send it on.
It's been moved and seconded. Do you have a question?
I have a question.
Commissioner Dunn?
Was that also backfilled with clay?
Actually, most of that is right down to the floor level, or a little bit above floor level, so there's still some material that's going to be coming out where this area was in a good portion of that floor. Because the floor is not perfectly flat, it's
Okay.
pitched to a low point, so there are areas, where there's still soil to be removed.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
But that's already figured in the original bid.
Yes.
Commissioner Graytop?
Matt, is there any way of knowing, geologically studying this property, or knowing that you've got those weak points down in there somewhere before you actually get to them, so that the bids could be a little bit more accurate, or no?
Are you speaking to the silt seams and layers? We did have boring information in the area and around the perimeter of this area from which we established soil profiles, so we had a guess. As you all are probably familiar, if you've all been here a while, You know, we've got that soft clay layer we always have to cut through when we build these new cells. So we were
Yeah.
able to profile that pretty accurately. When you're trying to catch those sort of spurious areas, the sand or silt, it's a little bit hit or miss, because it's pretty cost prohibitive to do a grid of bores throughout the property where you're gonna be working. So we kind of had the information we work with. And we actually, when we were developing this bid, we looked at a lot of historical borings going way back and kind of threw all that information together to get the profiles and provide as much information to bidders as possible on what they could expect. So in short, we did the best we could.
Okay, no, I appreciate it, and I see you're within the contingency that you planned for.
Well, we've eaten up quite a bit of the contingency on the project, and I'm not going to tell you we're not going to have potentially some more change orders. But what I will say is that we did, I'm seeing where we're going to be coming under on some line items as well. So hopefully it'll balance out and be reasonable.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rushing, you had a question?
Just, you pretty much answered it. If you might
Okay.
be coming back for a change order on the exact same thing potentially then.
Seeing no more questions,
Or a similar one. Yeah.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Matt.
We have the Smiths Creek, I didn't see a Smiths Creek landfill activities report in there. Did I miss?
No, there's not.
Just down there.
Okay. Any other environmental or public works matters? Seeing none, information only, I would accept a motion to receive and file Parks and Rec monthly financial. It's been moved and supported. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's been, it's been moved and supported. It's been approved. We'll move on to receive and file packets.
So moved? Support.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor, say aye.
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 Carried.
Motion to adjourn. Support.
Move to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. We are.
Does this need to be for final action? Yeah, okay.
Are you ready?
Born ready, buddy.
I'd like to call the Ways and Means Committee order, please. Could I have a roll call?
Commissioner McConnell, Commissioner Tamian. Here. Commissioner Heidemann.
Here.
Commissioner Bohm,
Here.
Commissioner Dunn.
Here.
Commissioner Greatop.
Here.
Commissioner Rushing.
Here. I see in item 2, we're actually going to have 4 additions. You have the A and B listed, but you also were given, and what I'd like to do is on 7E, the one that's titled Non-Aeronautical Lease, I'd like that to be put at 7E. And then the next one, Assignment and Assumption Cleaves Lease, as 7F.
And those are for final action too, David.
Okay, those 2 are for final action.
Second.
Any discussion?
Motion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can I have a motion to accept the,
Agenda as presented, I move.
Second.
any discussion? All
Aye.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passed. At this time, do we have any citizens wishing to be heard? Seeing none. Updates? We have none. No conceptual instance?
I got something. Carrie and I are going to kind of tag team this one here. So we had our actuarial report a month ago, maybe, give or take. 92% pension. We're at 30% in our health care, okay? When I first got on the board, we had 5 to 7 years, and then our health care fund was exhausted. I think the recent report, correct me if I'm wrong, it was somewhere in the 14 to 17-year period at a 30% funding ratio. The state of Michigan is going to be requiring communities here in this next calendar year, if you're under a 40% funding, you have to file a notice with the state, and you've got to put an action plan moving forward. We have recently, and Carrie has recently met with some Blue Cross representatives to look at some of the different potential design plan changes to what currently our existing plan is. And so there's multiple pieces. There's eligibility issues, there's all these other things you can discuss, but right for now, I just want to focus on the existing plan that they have and perhaps look to make some tweaks to it. We have to do it. We're not out of the woods by any stretch.
I'm proposing a series of meetings coming up here, workshops, that aren't necessarily, that are for the board members, don't get me wrong, but they're also going to be open to the retirees, and bring the Blue Cross representatives in here to be able to talk to this. If we're going to be looking to make some changes, we've got to do them relatively quick because our calendar year is January 1. And you want to chime in a little bit, Carrie? What I'm looking at for a schedule is to have August 9th, I think at 4 o'clock, you said the Blue Cross people, which is a Thursday. Then we'll have it on our agenda at our full board meeting, August 16th. Then look to do an additional workshop on Wednesday, August 22nd at 4 p.m. It will be the same information presented. It will just give people different times that they'll be able to come in and hear
4
this.
o'clock
and take
also
a
on
look.
that next 22nd?
I'm assuming that's the time for the Blue Cross. So it gives Thursday, the Wednesday, then like I said, regular at our full board to take a look at the information. The old proverbial kick the can down the road, we're not doing it. We need to take this and start to move on this and make some additional tweaks to it. So, Carrie, you want to chime in?
Sure. We did have to file a report with the state this year based on our most recent actuarial evaluation, and we were determined that by the state's definition, we were not underfunded because they do have 2 criteria. Your plan has to be 40% or greater funded, and your actuarial computed contribution has to be greater than 12% of your governmental fund revenues. Our contribution was like 11.8%, so we barely squeaked by without having to do a compliance plan this year. I don't expect we'll be that lucky next year. And once you are flagged as underfunded, you have 180 days to submit a plan to the state of Michigan. And you also have to prove that your plan's going to work. Many governments that have submitted a waiver or submitted a plan, they have been rejected because they didn't have actuarial valuations and different statistics to back it up. So we know that this is going to be coming next year, so if we start looking at some options this year, then we will be ahead of the game and hopefully not have to take any drastic measures.
It's kind of the plan, and Jackie, if you can help me push some of the information out too, just through your mechanism. So the first workshop, August 9th at 4 p.m., we'll do it here. Thursday, August 16th at a regular board meeting, 6 p.m., and then Wednesday, August 22nd at 4 p.m., and then send it out to the, the retire groups. I've been in front of every year I go to the retiree luncheons, present the information, that kind of stuff, and we've said we were going to have to, here's where we're at now coming off the heels of our actuarial reports. I think Carrie's going to be able to get some numbers from our actuarial, some rough estimates to see, how much, if we do this, it'll move, our funding to this. If we do that, it'll move it to this. So those are, some important things to get accomplished. Any questions from any commissioners?
We want to get ahead of the ball game on this.
Yep. Okay. All right, we'll move on. Conceptual initiatives. Seeing none. We have no old business. Moving on to new business. 7A, Region 10 prepaid inpatient health plan funding. Motion. Can I have a motion to forward this to full board?
So moved.
Have a second?
Support.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Moving on to 7B, and we have Mr. Marsh here. Give us a rundown, please, Ron, if you would. The courthouse replacement boiler project recommendation, and this is for final action.
This is final?
Yes.
Good evening. Some time ago, when we were at the courthouse, we had a chiller go down, and it kind of put on the radar the need for us to continue to start to look to replace the existing boilers. A bit of a history there. They're the original boilers to the building. I believe they're 1953 or 54. And they used to serve not only the courthouse, but the old jail that sat just to the north. And then when the jail was demoed, the steam line that used to feed that building was basically abandoned and capped off. So the boilers that used to create steam were retrofitted to water in the 1980s. And over the last year, we needed to accelerate this project because the steam exchanger is starting to show signs of end of life. So temporarily, we've installed a inline water filter that filtrates all of the metals that are just basically deteriorating. The particles are closing and heating valves are getting plugged, that sort of thing. So we did some preliminary numbers to see what our projected project cost would be last December, and went to the purchasing department, see if we could get this on the fast track to try and get out there and see if we could get some competitive bids, which we did. And we're very surprised to see that it came in under our projected project costs. So in an effort to accelerate the install process, knowing that we have heating season coming in Michigan, who knows, September, October, we're asking for final action tonight for the low bidder. With Metro Controls, and Metro Controls does have some history working in St. Clair County, as they did the convention center rooftop units last year. And in speaking with that group, that went very well. We did hire an engineer to review and basically compile the bid component for speccing these units. And his recommendation was consistent to know that they met every mark on our scope of work.
I only have two things. One I already talked to Carrie about, and this is already going to be planned for under our capital improvements, so it's already in the budget.
Correct.
And the only question I have for you is what time frame, if this goes through final action, what time frame you looking to have the completed project?
We would like to initiate the purchase order tomorrow morning. And the lead time for the units have been confirmed that they're 4 weeks out. So the contractor will be able to initiate his order, and then we can prepare for the abatement of the boiler room and the demo process, so that the demo company works directly with the install company, so there's no one waiting on anyone else.
And what's the time frame though? 4 weeks total?
End of September, so September 29th,
Okay.
they should have heat in the building.
Great. All right. Commissioner Greatop.
Ron, the Stewart Mechanical at 665, is that a typo?
No, and unfortunately, I was embarrassed. He was sitting in on the bid opening, and I had to ask him, am I reading that correctly? They chose not to go with a base bid unit, and they bid an alternate, and I don't know if that skewed their number, because we did use Stewart Mechanical for the library boiler project, and they used an alternate that met the spec, but...
What is an alternate, like aftermarket?
So
Opposed to
an
new?
example is if we asked for a Buick Skylark, they could give us a Pontiac Torrent, but it would have to meet whatever the minimum specs would be.
Okay.
So they did not base bid it like the other four contractors did.
You're looking at 306 on the winner, 356, 365, 395, and 665. It almost looks like that 6 could be a 3 and he'd be right in the ballpark, but
Correct.
that's not a typo.
I was glad he was at the bid meeting.
Well, I guess that's why we go out for bids. We save $300,000.
If you can get away with it.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions?
Have vacation coming.
Okay, this is for final action. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Tamian?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I need a motion.
I'll make a
I'll make
motion.
support.
And a roll call, please.
Commissioner Tamian?
Yes.
Commissioner Heidemann?
Yes.
Commissioner Bohm?
Yes.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yes.
Commissioner Greatop?
Yes.
Commissioner Rushing?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
We'll sign your check, sir.
All right, we're going to move on to 7C, presentation from Stewart, Bouvet, and Whipple.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I handed out a presentation at each of your spots. As you know, each year you contract with our firm to do your annual financial audit. We come in sometime around April, spend probably 3 or 4 weeks doing your audit. My team going to each of the departments, checking a lot of the numbers and so forth. And I'm here just to give a very, very brief outline of this. The audit report, which I hope everybody got a copy of, probably about a 200-page document. We'll sit here and go through it page by page tonight, and we'll be here till early morning. But now, it is a very large document. What I try to do is summarize this in a presentation. And this year, I even separated it into part 1 and part 2. We're only going to touch part 1 in verbal, but I wanted to still give you the part 2 where it lists everything else. So if you turn in just past the table or the front page, one of the first things in the audit report is something called the Independent Auditor's Report. It's technically the only portion of the report that belongs to Stewart, Beauvais, and Whipple. You have what they call an unmodified or clean opinion. That's what you're striving for. Again, we come out, spend April doing the audit, then we pull it all together, and sometime in June, we have to submit it to the Department of Treasury, and that's what they're looking for. They want to see that unmodified opinion, which basically, again, means everything is presented in accordance with general accepted accounting principles and governmental auditing standards. Again, this year, you have received for the 2016 year the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting, which I commend you on. It's a very detailed look at your report. You submit it to a company in Chicago, organization in Chicago, and they go through it with a very, very, very fine-tooth comb. And they come up with a lot of different, sometimes odd comments, but you always, you have got it for the last few years, and I commend your staff on that. We work with them closely, and it works well. You also submitted for the 2017. We have no reason to believe you won't receive it also for the 2017 year. We're going to primarily talk about your general fund tonight. If you're there on page 1, towards the middle, you'll see you have assets of $29.8 million. You have liabilities of $17.2 million. What they call deferred inflows, which are similar to liabilities of $257,000, which left your fund balance or carry forward of $12,305,330. We also give you the 2016 data. That's up from $12,131,606, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. 3B is your statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. This year you took in $57.9 million, almost $58 million, expenditures of $52.6 million. You had other financing uses of 5.2, which is basically transfers to other funds there. So for the year ended December 31st, 2017, your general fund was to the positive $162,897. So basically, on a $57 million, $55 million budget, break-even year, a little better than a break-even, $162,000 to the good. Accounting-wise, you have to fold a couple other funds into your general fund. So if you look at one column, your budget and incentive fund and your development of revolving fund is folded in. But you, on your budget-based fund, how you adopt your budget, you were $162,000 to the good. As always, we include...
Well, what does that general, or that fund balance break down to percentage-wise, and where are we and what we should be? Are we right there?
Yeah, you may have a fund balance policy, and you're right along with your fund balance policy. Normally, they look at it in terms of months to operate. And again, if you have a $50 million budget, you divide that by 12, what is it, about $5 million, $4 million something a month. So you're right in the ballpark of what
We got 2.5 months to run if that's what it takes.
Yeah. There's, on page 7, I'll give you some graphs just to kind of outline where your money came from on page 7 for 2017 compared to 2016. The numbers are almost exact. You'll see about 51% of your revenues come from taxes, as you're well aware. The other big chunk is intergovernmental revenues, which is basically your state shared revenues. There, and you can see all the other pieces, pretty consistent from year to year. Doesn't change a lot. You can pretty well count on 50 cents of your budget, 50-some cents percent of your dollars come from taxes. Page 8 just does the same thing with your expenditures. Of your general fund, your biggest piece is spent on public safety, police, jail, things like that. 39% of that is on public safety. Judicial is about 18, general government's approximately 19. And you can see last year the public safety was 40, general government was 19 or 20 compared to 19. So within 1% from year to year, it stays pretty consistent. Page 9, gives you a bar graph of your general fund balance, and I commend you on this. Very few entities have seen where you've continually grown your fund balance a little bit each year. That's because you do, long-term forecasting and control your budget. Again, I commend the Board of Commissioners and administration on doing a good job with their budget. You'll see, again, it's just slightly over $10 million budget in total. Back in 2008, it was a little over $8 million there, so over the last 10 years, it's actually grown. On page 10, just gives a bar graph of your revenues and expenditures, and they almost mirror each other. You'll see in most cases, especially in the last few years, the revenues have slightly exceeded the expenditures. Back in 2008, 2009, it was a little bit, expenditures exceeded revenues, but very, very, very close each and every year. So you live within your means is basically what that's telling you. Whatever you collect, you watch it very closely. Back on page 1, sorry, at the bottom of page 1, just gives a breakdown of fund balances, some different categories of fund balance. Non-spendable fund balance basically is long-term receivables, money that will come in over a long-term period of time, so you can't spend them immediately is basically what it is. They are assets of the general fund, they're going to come back, but they're just not available to appropriate today. Committed fund balance is things that is your budget incentive fund that you've set aside for your budget incentive, which leaves $7,694,000 unassigned fund balances that is available to for projects or for just cash flow of the everyday activity of the county that you need a significant sum of fund balance to operate, as you pointed out. That's primarily the number section that I wanted to touch on. If you turn over to page 2, there's a couple other reports with your audit. When we're doing the audit, not only do we audit the numbers, but we take a look at your procedures to try to make sure that 2 sets of eyes see everything. We do a lot of testing. We go out to your departments, we talk to your department heads, and we pull samples. We're happy to report again on your report in internal control. There's no what they call material weaknesses, which again I commend your staff on. If we become aware of any, we need to report it to the Board of Commissioners. Again, there were no major internal control issues. The management letter is a letter that kind of explains how the audit went. Audit firms are not required to come to a meeting like this. We appreciate the opportunity, but it just explains whether we had any difficulty. We didn't have any difficulty. We plan the audit, towards the end of the year, each year, calendar year. Usually come in April and do the audit in April. And it goes pretty well the same each year, again, with no difficulties. And also, sometimes we attach some things that we've talked with administration to the back of that letter. They're not material weaknesses, but just areas that we want you to consider, with procedures and things like that. Part 2 of the report, as you know, other than the general fund, you have a lot of other funds that are used to account for activity of the county. I won't go through those tonight. We put this on this summary report, so you don't have to go through this 200-page document to see it. But it lists each of the revenues and expenditures of each of the funds, as well as the fund balance for each fund there. I'll be happy to spend a lot more time, but I know your time is limited.
Valuable. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
I'm just going to make a comment. Been around here for 14 years. Howard's been here 16, served through worst economic downturn arguably ever, right? And we maintained a strong fund balance. We weathered the storm fairly well philosophically. We may agree to disagree on some things as a board in particularly, but we also understand our first and foremost responsibilities to keep the county healthy financially, right? Bottom line. So, Carrie, kudos to you being part of this and stuff. So, probably, one of the prouder things, I guess I would, if you say prouder, however you want to use it, is that we've been able to maintain and we've been able to keep this, chip on a good financial path, and all things, whatever, you can hang your hat on that.
Just a comment, looking at the graph. We're still not back to the revenue or the expenditures that we had in 2008, and here we are going on 2018. and we're not back there yet. That's been a whole decade. And to be able to keep everything balanced and make those adjustments as needed to keep the financial health of the county has been extraordinary. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the cooperation that we had during all of those years from the elected officials of the county, past and present, from our employees. Everyone pitched in to help us through those difficult moments. We couldn't have done it alone.
Commissioner Greatop. Go on.
Can't remember. Move on.
All right, do we have any other comments or questions? Can I have a motion to accept his presentation?
So moved. Support.
Any further questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to work with you
Paul.
again.
Okay, we're going to move to 7D, Resolution 18-16, amending parts of the St. Clair County Employees Retirement System Ordinance.
Make a motion, we send it on to the full board.
Support.
Any discussion? Can I have a brief explanation?
Sure, these are just some minor adjustments and corrections to the retirement ordinance. It is reflecting the fact that retirement health care funds no longer exist in the pension fund, and they are now paid from the separate trust, so it does have that separation. And it also reflects that the county's pension plan was closed beginning in 2009, so those dates were put into the ordinance as well.
Okay, anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Okay, we're going to move on to 7E, the non-aeronautical lease. Gary, you want to chime in on these?
Yeah. So what this is about is that, as you're aware, in the airport industrial park area, we have some properties where the FAA permitted us to sell the underlying real estate, others are ground leases. The ground leases have been problematic. I mean, buyers don't like it, banks don't like it. I mean, they want to know that people own the real estate. So, but that aside, what we've had our sales, and then the board always, the first document, 7F, is the assignment and assumption of the lease for closing that they're going to have next week. And I apologize for running this in here so late, but I didn't know until yesterday that the closing they plan on having was next week. So normally, there's just an assumption and an assignment of the lease, and that's it, we're done. What happened, the change makes this one a little bit different, is the FAA came in and did an audit, and they provided funding for the airport industrial park. And what they said is, you need to get your lease rates up to date, and you need to update your lease to get it to a more modern type document, because some of these leases were 30, 40 years old, and the rates were back. So what Kathy at the airport did, she did a very nice job with all of this. She got an appraisal to establish current lease rates. And then I worked with her to establish a more modern, if you will, lease. And so what happened, and the other thing the FAA wanted built in were automatic COLA increases using the Urban Consumer All Cities Index. That's a federal Department of Labor index. So they looked over the rate, the appraisal, and the lease. They said it was good. And basically what they said is, you know, from this day forward, anything new has to be under this new lease. And so we were all set. So these folks are proposing to close. They have the right to assign their existing lease. And it runs until June of 2022. So what we said is, we'll do the assignment and assumption approval, which is our routine thing, and then we will give you a commitment in writing that when this expires, the assumption and the old lease will give you the new lease, and you'll be all set. You're not gonna get like booted out and lose your building and your property. So they were all set to go with that, and their bank, which is Chemical, and I'm not being critical of them, they said, that's not good enough. I mean, we have to actually have the signed lease, you know, versus just somebody saying, trust us, we'll sign it in the future. The buyers and their lawyers trusted us, but I'm not saying the bank didn't, Chemical, but they, you know, their loan processing people said, we gotta have the lease signed. So that's why both of these are here. So we have the assignment and assumption, and when that expires, this new lease will kick in. Carrie raised a good question, more than one. I mean, she goes through the stuff in detail, and it got dropped on her at the last minute, for which I apologize, because like I said, I had no idea that they had to close. I talked to the attorney, David Whipple, and I said, can this just wait 2 weeks? And he said, well, we don't have an extension. Our due diligence expires Friday, and we have to close within 5 days, so they could say, no, you don't get your extension, and we lose our deal. So he said, I would really appreciate if you guys could get this approved tonight, so that's why I'm here. So that was that part of it. Carrie raised a good question. She said, this goes on for such a lengthy period of time, and she said, you have told us in the past that commissioners in certain circumstances can't bind future boards. And this would bind a future board to enter into this new, well, we will already enter to the new lease, but the term will start until the old one expires. And Carrie's right. In a lot of ways, there are things where you can't bind future boards, and it's primarily where a board attempts to take action that takes away the legislative authority of a board. So for example, let's say we had a board that had different feelings than this one, and they said, we want to pass an ordinance, retiree healthcare ordinance, and we want to put in there, like you have reserved your right to change it, we want to put in there that future boards can never change it. That you can't do that. I mean, that's within each board's authority to make those decisions. However, there are other kinds of documents, primarily business transactions, but also labor agreements, where things have to be long-term just by business necessity, and it doesn't take away your legislative responsibilities or obligate you to take away your budgetary responsibilities. Good example of that would be that PACE contract you approved. That's, I think, a 15 or 20-year deal. So obviously, we were obligating many future boards to be bound by that loan agreement, and you just do it because it is a practical business matter. These lots wouldn't sell, buildings wouldn't get built if these types of things work. So it's a business necessity type test. So Carrie raised that and asked that I address it because we have had different opinions on other types of issues. So my recommendation is that both of these be approved for final action so these folks can close their deal next week.
I do have a couple questions.
Sure.
Mr. Tom. I didn't notice that it was one and the same property until I dug into it. We just got these just prior to the meeting.
Yeah, you did. Yep.
And I was on the, initially, that this was two different, and the description is slightly different between the two, which is fine. It still matches and all. So that's there. But the lease commencing on January 1st, 2023, 11 cents per square foot, Novelty's property for, that seems awful cheap.
Well, that came out to the appraised value for a ground lease. That's all I can tell you. It was a legitimate appraisal. I reviewed it by a highly qualified appraiser. Okay. And I think the people that do consulting for us at the airport recommended this company who has done similar type appraisals. It made sense to me, and it made sense to the FAA.
Now, and again, I just got this tonight. This is a building or a piece of property?
It's a piece of property.
No buildings?
A building on it, I believe, yeah.
Because I've leased buildings before, it's business, and you got a lot more experience than I do. But I'm thinking $3 per square foot is a more realistic figure.
No, this is just the ground.
Just
Okay, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah,
This was just given to us.
The building's a whole other figure.
If I would have been given this earlier, like I normally do, I'd come and ask Terry.
Then I apologize for that. I had no idea that there was a closing date until yesterday, they told me.
Right, and if I need to ask, because that's what I do.
Sure, absolutely.
So, if that's the going rate, so it's gonna go from, whatever it was, 1,000,
It's going like from 1,200 to 4,200 or something.
45, 37.50. Okay, you've answered my questions.
Yeah, it's going from 1237 to 40, whatever you said, 45.
45.
The other thing is, the prior lease provided for COLA adjustments, as I mentioned, but they were not automatic, and the new one is automatic. They will go up every year.
Gary, I guess the fact that this lease that we're going to extend out 30 years starts in 2022, that's where the idea came from. Can we take a board down the road and commit them to this? And you explained why we can do that.
Right.
Would it be just as easy to take and put these together, take the lease that they have right now, run it out to 2022, so that the price stayed the same, and then the new price kicked in at that time, they could still get a 30-year lease out of it, or are we getting too complicated?
Well, we could do that. I mean, it would be more costly, and it would require going back to the FAA for their approval.
We don't want to do that.
And it's just,
Okay.
honestly, getting the first set of these done was hard enough.
All right.
I like the idea of having the COLA in there automatic, because then the people that have leased it they can plan ahead.
Any other discussions? Do we need a roll call on these? All right,
We need a motion.
okay,
So
need a motion
moved.
first, please.
Support.
For final action?
Yes, for final action. And do we do these together? Or we need to do
You
the
can do-
assignment assumption first?
Yeah, do it that way. I think that'd be better.
All right, we do have the assignment assumption as 7F. We've discussed them both. So I believe we have a motion for the assignment assumption. If not, I would entertain one.
Second,
We do.
I'd make that motion.
We do.
Okay,
Okay.
I'd second it.
Okay, 7F is going to be addressed first. And this is for final action. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Commissioner Tamian?
Yes.
Commissioner Heidemann?
Yes.
Commissioner Bohm?
Yes.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yes.
Commissioner Graytop?
Yes.
Commissioner Rushing?
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to 7E, the non-aeronautical lease. And this is also for final action. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Tamian?
Yes.
Commissioner Heidemann?
Yes.
Commissioner Bohm?
Yes.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yes.
Commissioner Graytop?
Yes.
Commissioner Rushing?
Yes. All right, we are done with new business. At this time, do we have any other Ways and Means Matters? Yes.
I just neglected to say it earlier, but I want to give kudos to our financial department, to Danielle and Carrie, and I know that Dina was involved a lot in the audit that was done here. They just did an awesome job. I think, Paul, you would back me up on that this team really goes out of their way and does a great job to get this stuff done right. And I think recognition is going to be coming in the way of an award again, so congratulations to everybody involved.
Any other Ways and Means Matters? Okay, moving on to information only. Can I have a motion to file?
So moved.
Support?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Can I have a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Support?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned.